Namaste friends, this is Jayalakshmi Ravichandran signing in on behalf of Magic Needles. Welcome back to the third part of Summertop CAL. We completed 13 rounds in the last part, that is the second part. Now we continue with the 14th row. Okay, so to begin with, as usual, I am using 3.75 mm crochet hook and 4-ply cotton variegated yarn here. I'm continuing with that. So to begin with, turn your work. Single crochet in the same stitch there. Chain 3, single crochet in the next DC. Chain 3, single crochet in the next DC. Chain 3, single crochet in the next DC, and this is the repeat. Chain 3, single crochet in the next DC. You can either do chain 4 or chain 3 as per your hand tension. I am doing chain 3 so that it is close enough. Chain 3, single crochet in the next DC. So continue this till the end of the row. I shall meet you at this particular point. I've come to the end of this row, so I have chain 3. I'm placing my last SC in the third chain over here. Turn your work. You can either chain 3 or do a standing DC here. Having done that, chain 1 and place an SC here in this space, this chain space. Then make 3 DC. Chain 3 and 3 DC in the same chain. Next SC in the next chain 3 space, and this is going to be your repeat. So 3 DC shell in the next chain space, 3 DC, chain 3, 3 DC shell in the next chain space, 2, third DC, chain 3, 3 more DCs in the same space, 1, 2 and 3, and in the next chain space an SC, single crochet. So this is going to be the repeat. In one chain space you're going to do single crochet, in the next you're going to place 3 DC, chain 3, 3 DC shell. Continue till the end. I shall meet you at the end of this row. I shall do one more time. 3 DC, chain 3, 3 DC shell here in the next, chain 3, again 3 DC in the same chain space, and in the next chain space you're going to make a SC. So it's going to be a repeat of this. So this is how it will look. I'll meet you at the end of this row. We have placed the last SC here. Now chain 2 I've already done a chain 1 and DC in the DC over here on top of the DC. So that completes this round. Now turn your work. Either chain 3 or DC on this DC. So I'm going to do a standing DC here. Chain 1 and a DC in the middle DC here. Chain 3, DC in the chain space, SC in the chain space, chain 3. Now you're going to do 2 incomplete DC together, that is one incomplete DC on the middle DC of the 3 DC and another incomplete DC in the middle DC of the next middle DC of the 3 DC shell. So this is how it is going to look. Chain 3, SC in chain space, chain 3, incomplete DC in the middle DC here, the second DC, skip one DC, and in this second DC you do one incomplete DC, another incomplete DC in the middle DC of the next 3 DC component. That is, you're not going to work in this DC nor in the single SC nor in this DC. You're going to skip these 3 and here you're going to make a incomplete DC and complete the 2 DC together. So this is how it is going to look. Chain 3, single crochet in the chain space, and this is how it's going to continue till the end. I will do one more time and show you. We have placed a single crochet here in chain space. Now chain 3, incomplete DC here, again incomplete DC in this part, in this middle DC, yarn over, pull through all the 3. So this is your 2 incomplete DCs together, combining both the middle DCs of the 3 DC components of these 2 shells. Okay, so chain 3, single crochet in the chain space, and this is how we are going to continue. I'll meet you at the end of this row here. At this point I will meet you. We've come to the end of this row here. Place my SC here in this chain space, chain 3, DC in the middle DC here, chain 2, and DC on this DC here. Picking up the stitch is a little tricky. Yeah. We have to find that V and insert our hook here. Yes. So this is how it looks. Here this gives a large space, so what I'm going to do is chain 1, place a DC on this SC here, and then another DC over here, so that it gives me a neater finish. Okay, now turn our work. At the end of this row you will have 29 DC togethers and 1 DC on either side here, plus an extra DC, one here and one DC here. So 4 DCs and 29 DC togethers, and others are chain spaces all around. And in the previous round you'll have 30 shells. Okay, turn your work, either chain 3 or a DC on this DC, the very first DC here. And then 3 DC in the space, the chain space here, DC on this DC, three DC in next chain space. All the chain spaces will have 3 DCs in them, and place 1 DC on the SC and 1 DC on the DC together. So every chain space you will have to do 3 DCs. DC on DC together, 3 DC in next chain space. We have 3 chain spaces, so there we will do 3 DCs. Place a DC on the SC here. So this is how it continues in this row. It is a repeat of this particular row here. That is the 11th row. Same as this. This is 13, 14, 15, 16, 17th row. This is. So 17th is same as the 11th row. So I'll meet you at the end of this row. I'll repeat one more time. I'll repeat once. 3 DC in chain space, DC on DC2 together, again 3 DC in the next chain space, and DC on this SC here, and continue till the end. Repeat the sequence till the end. We have come to the end of this row, and I have placed my last DC here. Now chain 1 and turn. Place an SC in the very first DC here, and then we are going to do this part here. So having placed SC here and SC on the next DC here, chain 2, skip 2 and SC here, chain 2, skip 2 and SC in the next thing, 1, 2, you've skipped SC in the next thing, next DC, and then henceforth is going to be chain 2, skip 2 and DC, and DC, chain 2, skip 2, 1 and 2 and DC on DC. So this is how it's going to continue till the end. And before placing the last two sets, we will be doing SC, 2 chains SC. When I come to this particular area of the other side, I will meet you. I will do one more time and show you. Chain 2, skips 2 DCs and DC on DC. This is how this row is going to be. Continue like this. We have come to the end of this row. I have completed with SC, chain 3, SC, chain 3, SC, and an SC in the last DC. Chain 1, and turn your work. Now you're going to form the base for shoulder joining. So I'm going to slip stitch up to this point, up to this DC here, and then begin my work. So I can make my slip stitches little loose and go ahead. Like I'm skipping a chain and placing my slip stitches little loose. So this won't be visible much, and slip stitch into the DC. Having done that, chain 3 or a DC here. So either chain 3 or you can place a DC directly. I always place a DC, a twisted DC here. Chain 2, DC on DC, chain 2, DC on DC, and this is the repeat for this row. And when you come to the other end, you will stop at this DC. Okay, and then we come back. We work in the reverse again. I've come to the end of this row and I've placed my last DC here, and yeah, this portion is going to form the base to take it up forward as shoulder. Okay, and we stop here in this part and continue with the other rows in the next part. So bye friends, till then, have a nice day, stay safe.